2. Berkeley to Kant. The collapse of the outer world. It is necessary at this point briefly to retrace some ground in order to summarize the effect of modern philosophy on science. When Descartes divided reality into two alien substances, mind and body, held together by a third substance, God, he thereby deformed man's perspective on both mind and body. The mind increasingly was seen in Neoplatonic terms as an alien and spiritual substance, so that the biblical unity of man was lost. Attempts to locate the mind were rendered increasingly unscientific and irrelevant. At the same time, the body was reduced to a machine by Descartes, a mechanism without mind and subject to purely mechanical laws and to be understood in terms of them. Thomas Hobbes, 1588 to 1679, challenged the validity of Descartes' dualism. He held that the only reality is matter in motion. Sensation, thought, and consciousness were reduced to phantasms created by the actions of atoms in the brain. Hobbes's views were premature and did not find ready acceptance because of the suspicion of unbelief which clung to his name. But Sir Isaac Newton, 1642 to 1727, had the odour of sanctity, whether or not deserved, and his reduction of the physical world to matter and motion, a mechanical principle explicable entirely in mathematical terms, did gain favour almost at once, to a far greater degree than Newton probably intended. In the preface to the first edition of his Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, 1686, Newton wrote, "I offer this work as the mathematical principles of philosophy, for the whole burden of philosophy seems to consist in this: from the phenomena of motions to investigate the other phenomena, and to this end the general propositions in the first and second book are directed. In the third book, I give an example of this in the explication of the system of the world, for by the propositions mathematically demonstrated in the former books, in the third, I derive from the celestial phenomena the forces of gravity with which the bodies tend to the sun and the several planets. Then, from these forces, by other propositions, which are also mathematical, I deduce the motions of the planets, the comets, the moon, and the sea. I wish we could derive the rest of the phenomena of nature by the same kind of reasoning from mechanical principles, for I am induced by many reasons to suspect that they may all depend on certain forces by which the particles of bodies, by some causes hitherto unknown, are either mutually impelled towards one another and cohere in regular figures, or are repelled and recede from one another. These forces being unknown, philosophers have hitherto attempted the search of nature in vain, but I hope the principles here laid down will afford some light either to this or some truer method of philosophy." Bishop Berkeley accepted the Newtonian view, but asked the further question as to which was the real world, the world of the mind with its mathematical principles, or the empty, dead world of matter. He did not deny the testimony of sense impressions or existence. Rather, Berkeley confined knowledge to this world of thought or sense impressions. Thus, in the third of his three dialogues between Hylas and Philonous, in opposition to skeptics and atheists, Philonous declares, "With all my heart retain the word matter and apply it to the objects of sense, if you please, provided you do not attribute to them any substance distinct from their being perceived. I shall never quarrel with you for an expression. Matter, or material substance, are terms introduced by philosophers, and, as used by them, imply a sort of independency or a subsistence distinct from being perceived by a mind, but are never used by common people, or, if ever, it is to signify the immediate objects of sense. One would think, therefore, so long as the names of all particular things with the terms sensible, body, stuff, and the like are retained, the word matter should never be missed in common talk. And in philosophical discourses it seems the best way to leave it quite out. since there is not, perhaps, any one thing that hath more favoured and strengthened the depraved bent of the mind towards atheism than the use of that general confused term. In An Essay Towards a New Theory of Vision, Berkeley stressed the fact that all we really see are sensations, not the material world itself. In the Principles of Human Knowledge, Berkeley asserted that all that exists is our knowledge. In the first sentence of this latter treatise, Berkeley declared, "It is evident to anyone who takes a survey of the objects of human knowledge that they are either ideas actually imprinted on the senses, or else such as are perceived by attending to the passions and operations of the mind, or lastly, ideas formed by help of memory and imagination, either compounding, dividing, or barely representing those originally perceived in the aforesaid ways." Very clearly, Berkeley began with a commitment to the empiricism of Locke. Moreover, with Descartes, Locke, and all of modern philosophy, Berkeley, for all his piety, began with the assumption or presupposition of the ultimacy and autonomy of the mind of man. Berkeley was thus a world removed from the ordinary believer of a century before, whose faith was a world and life view. Berkeley's religion, philosophy, and science had retreated into the mind of man. In religion, the consequence was soon to become manifest in pietism and experientialism, or, as it was then called, experimental religion. Berkeley claimed to present a common-sense philosophy without unwarranted assumptions. In one sense, he was right. The lifeless, mechanistic, material universe of Newton, after Descartes, was not the world of common sense. It was in time to become the world of modern man, cold, empty, silent, and dead. But the common sense of Berkeley's day did not accept it. It was the Enlightenment thinkers who welcomed it as a liberation from God. Joseph Addison, as a rationalist and a party to the new intellectualism, wrote his famous ode to answer the common sense distaste for the new view of things, and to insist that the deist God made all the emptiness and silence wonderful to reason, because the universe's mathematical order sang more gloriously than its silence. Who, though in solemn silence all move round the dark terrestrial ball, what though nor real voice nor sound amid their radiant orbs be found? In reason's ear they all rejoice and utter forth a glorious voice, for, ever singing as they shine, the hand that made us is divine. This is the cold world of Newton, that Berkeley's common sense philosophy and his empiricism undercut. For him, apart from God, minds and ideas are all that exist. His presupposition is the mind, and Hume, operating on the same Cartesian presupposition, reduced philosophy to the contents of the mind, ideas. For Berkeley, all things are simply perceptions. All ideas, both perceptions and images, are passive. Here, Berkeley followed the implicit passivity of the mind which is common to Descartes and Locke. For both these men, the veracity of knowledge in part depended on this passive character of the mind. The mind is a receiver, neutral and clean of bias, so that it faithfully records what the senses report. Add right reason, that is, clear and rigorous induction and deduction, to the senses, and you have true knowledge. Empiricists like Locke were thus intensely concerned with establishing right reason as the necessary receiver of faithful impressions. For Berkeley, the active agents in ideas are first God, who sends the impressions which the mind receives, and second, the spirit, which is the true man. Hume cannot be appreciated apart from his admiration for Berkeley. Hume's work was clearly based on Berkeley's premises. He insisted that we can only know ideas, and ideas are the only existences we know. To assume God and soul or spirit is as invalid as to assume a material universe. Moreover, in Section 7, of the idea of necessary connection, of an inquiry concerning human understanding, Hume attacked the concept of causality as of psychological rather than natural origin. The world of Newton, being a mechanical world, requires association by contiguity to produce results. If a billiard ball moves, it is because another billiard ball, for example, has struck it. In the Newtonian world, God was necessary as a first cause, as the starter of the action. As a result of this, Hume said, according to these philosophers, everything is full of God. This line of reasoning, said Hume, gets us into fairyland. It appears then that this idea of a necessary connection, which among events arises from a number of similar instances which occur, of the constant conjunction of these events, nor can that idea ever be suggested by any one of these instances surveyed in all possible lights and positions. But there is nothing in a number of instances different from every single instance which is supposed to be exactly similar, except only that after repetition of similar instances, the mind is carried by habit, upon the appearance of one event, to expect its usual attendant and to believe that it will exist. This connection, therefore, which we feel in the mind, this customary transition of the imagination from one object to its usual attendant, is a sentiment or impression from which we form the idea of power or necessary connection. Nothing further is in the case. Contemplate the subjects on all sides, and you will never find any other origin of that idea. This is the sole difference between one instance, from which we can never receive the idea, connection, and a number of similar instances by which it is suggested. The first time a man saw the communication of motion by impulse, as by the shock of two billiard balls, he could not pronounce that the one event was connected, but only that it was conjoined with the other. After he has observed several instances of this nature, he then pronounces them to be connected. What alteration has happened to give rise to this new idea of connection? Nothing but that he now feels those events to be connected in his imagination and can readily foretell the existence of one from the appearance of the other. When we say, therefore, that one object is connected with another, we mean only that they have acquired a connection in our thought and gave rise to this inference by which they become proofs of each other's existence, a conclusion which is somewhat extraordinary, but which seems founded on sufficient evidence. Nor will its evidence be weakened by any general difference of the understanding or sceptical suspicion concerning every conclusion which is new and extraordinary. No conclusions can be more agreeable to skepticism than such as make discoveries concerning the weakness and narrow limits of human reason and capacity. End quote. Given the premises of modern philosophy, Hume's conclusions are valid. The only possible valid knowledge becomes exhaustive knowledge. If we know every connection of two kinds of events from the beginning to the end of time, then we can come to valid and assured knowledge. We must add, however, that with the modern view of infinite time, this impossible ideal is rendered doubly impossible. For Hume, all that we can truly know are our ideas, nothing more. Hume did not deny that the physical universe exists. He denied that it could be known. To a limited degree, some idea of the world was possible for Hume by means of mathematics, dealing with number and quantity, and by means of experimental reasoning. But all this could lead only, to use more modern terms, to a practical and pragmatic truth, not to any historically held idea of absolute or assured truths. In the well-known words of the conclusion of his inquiry, Hume declared, "When we run over libraries, persuaded of these principles, what havoc must we make? If we take in our hand any volume, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion." End quote. Reasoning had to be abstract because now only an abstract universe existed for modern philosophy, a universe from which God, mind, life, meaning, sound, and all else save quantity and number had been extracted. A new common sense view of nature was now in the making, a dead universe in which man is an accident looking hopefully at the stars in the hope that somewhere the accident of life and mind has occurred on another planet. How does man live in Hume's universe? Not by total skepticism, Hume held, but by a practical acceptance of a world he must theoretically negate. In the conclusion to Book 1 of his Treatise on Human Nature, Hume wrote, "Shall we then establish it for a general maxim that no refined or elaborate reasoning is ever to be received? If we embrace this principle, we run into the most manifest absurdities. If we reject it in favour of those reasonings, we subvert entirely the human understanding. We have therefore no choice left but between a false reason and none at all. Most fortunately, it happens that since reason is incapable of dispelling these clouds, nature suffices to that purpose and cures me of this philosophical melancholy. I dine, I play a game of backgammon, I converse and am merry with my friends. No, if I must be a fool, as all who reason or believe anything certainly are, my follies shall at least be natural and agreeable. In all the incidents of life, we ought still to preserve our skepticism. Where reason is lively and mixes itself with some propensity, it ought to be assented to." Hume's conclusion that causality is neither self-evident nor demonstrable was accepted by Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804, who recognized that this same doubt is valid with respect to all other principles and fundamentals of science and philosophy. In effect, all that remained in the world after Hume was ideas, pure reason. All else was open to radical doubt. The presupposition of Cartesian philosophy was the autonomous mind or reason of man. The logic of this premise, accepted by modern philosophy, left it with nothing but pure reason. For Hume, thought had no objective or metaphysical validity of any kind, although Leibniz tried to hold that it did. Kant agreed that universality and necessity, or causality, are not empirical deductions. They are rational synthesis, not an intrinsic necessity. The necessity of these things is to the human reason, not to the material world. They are conditions of our sense experience, not an aspect of things in themselves. Newtonian science deals with appearance, not reality. The world of science is a realm of phenomena, of appearance, not of things in themselves. Thus, what in modern philosophy from Descartes through Hume was a problem and a limitation became in Kant a virtue. The retreat of the mind into itself and the limitation of rationality to the mind became not problems to Kant, but rather the starting point of greater claims for the autonomous mind of man. Kant's thesis is summed up in 3 short sentences in his preface to the 2nd edition of his Critique of Pure Reason. Hitherto, it has been assumed that all our knowledge must conform to objects. But all attempts to extend our knowledge of objects by establishing something in regard to them a priori by means of concepts have, on this assumption, ended in failure. We must therefore make trial whether we may not have more success in the task of metaphysics if we suppose that objects must conform to our knowledge. Moreover, in terms of this, Kant could declare that the understanding does not derive its laws a priori for, but prescribes them to nature. Kant's world, like Descartes', is a trichotomy, but with a difference. Instead of mind, body, and God, we have in Kant subjective states, phenomena, the realm of knowledge, and things in themselves. Things in themselves are not knowable. They cannot even be called the world of material bodies or natural objects. The hard, cold and dead world of Newton is gone, and the world of Hegel and Darwin is in its dawning, a world of phenomena in which the order is derived from mind, man's mind. The reality of noumena, things in themselves, is neither denied nor affirmed. They are limiting concepts. Their role is not unlike that of the god of deism, needed to avoid the problem of infinite regress, but definitely kept out of the world after being posited as its starting point. So too, things in themselves maintain a formal reference point for reality without being real. God too was to become a limiting concept in theology, and in Paul Tillich, God is spoken of as one of whom it cannot be said that he exists or that he does not exist. He is beyond the category of existence and functions simply as a limiting concept for the reasonings of man's autonomous mind. What is real for the mind is its experience, the world of things for us, a reality relative to man. Absolute reality is not of any significance nor a matter of concern. Rather, the emphasis and the realm of knowledge is the world of phenomena or experience, of reality relative to us, of things for us. Down the road from this lies existentialism and the hippie emphasis on doing your own thing as the truth for man. The principle of Kant is that only in experience is there truth. In 1748, Julien Offray de la Métrie published his Cartesian study, Man, a Machine. Descartes had taught that animals are mere machines, an aspect of the dead material universe. La Métrie reduced man to the same machine. Now a new opinion had been introduced, or a variation of the Cartesian premise. Man is an experiencing man. To live, the Romantic movement of the 19th and 20th centuries was soon to say, is to experience, and the fervid quest for experience was underway. The reality of God and an outer world had been replaced by a new reality of experience.